So thank you for joining tonight's webinar, Protecting the Delaware River Watershed in Pennsylvania with Stream Redesignations. So this webinar focuses specifically on the water quality regulations in the state of Pennsylvania. And just go over a couple logistical issues up top. You're welcome to use the chat box for comments, but we ask that folks hold their questions until the Q&A portion at the end because we have a lot of good material to cover tonight. And you can use the Q&A box to ask your questions then. And a recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be available on Clean Air Council's website, and we'll be emailing you the link in the near future. So the presenters tonight are myself, Jack Byerly. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator with Clean Air Council. I'm joined by Abby Jones, Vice President of Legal and Policy from Penn Future, Faith Zerby from Delaware Riverkeeper Network. She is the Water Watch Director, and Jim Voight, the President of the Apwc Watershed Conservancy. So we'd like to begin our webinars with a land acknowledgement honoring the Lenape people and the Lenape-Hocking territory. So the Delaware River Watershed was part of the vast homeland of the Lenape, who were the inhabitants of eastern Pennsylvania and parts of New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware during the 1600s. After European colonization, an estimated 80% of Lenape died from violent conflict and disease. And over time, many Lenape were pushed out of their homeland by expanding European colonies and were forced to move west. And today, many Lenape now reside in Oklahoma, and there are also large Lenape communities in Wisconsin and Ontario. And many waterways in this region have retained Lenape names, including Aquashikala, Nakamixon, and Wissahickon, to name a few. So just an overview of tonight's webinar. We're going to be first going over what are designated uses and special protections, and then how do streams qualify for these special protections. But they're then going to go over what are the steps for petition submission, review, and regulatory adoption. And then there's going to be a case study presentation on the ongoing redesignation petition upgrade process that Aquashikala Creek is doing right now. So we'll begin by going over what are designated uses and special protections. So Pennsylvania water quality standards serve to, Clean Air Council. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Clean Air Council, our work in the Delaware River Watershed includes challenging development and infrastructure that threatens waterways, providing educational resources and guidance to residents on public hearings and other actions. We support municipalities to strengthen watershed protection ordinances through their zoning and saldo. We also work with partners to strengthen regulatory protections for the Delaware River and streams throughout the watershed, like stream redesignations. So, starting off with looking at the water quality standards in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania's water quality standards serve to prevent pollution in waterways and also restore and reclaim the health of waterways that have been polluted. And the water quality standards consists of 3 building blocks. And the first building block are the designated uses. So as a requirement under the Clean Water Act, the state assigns every waterway at least one designated use, which determines its level of protection. And the designated use is a classification that specifies how the state hopes the water body can support human and ecological needs. They may reflect how conditions of the waterway, the conditions of the waterway, or how the waterway is used. So these designations can be aspirational. They can be treated like goals, even if the uses aren't actually being attained or currently taking place in the waterway. And there are different categories of designated uses. All waterways have an aquatic life designated use, which looks at the ecological health of the stream. And this is the category we'll be focusing on tonight, but there's just to note, there are other categories like recreation and water supplies. So overall, the designated use decides the level of regulatory protection the stream receives. The second building block is the criteria. So each use has its own corresponding set of conditions or characteristics that it needs to maintain to protect that use. And DEP uses these criteria as the basis for developing pollutant limits for permitted discharges of effluent into each waterway. And there are specific criteria, which are quantitative and include characteristics like temperature limits or limits on pH levels or minimum concentrations of dissolved oxygen. And there's also general criteria, which is narrative form. And then finally, there's the anti-degradation program. And these are the provisions of the water quality standards that ensure the ongoing protection and maintenance of the water, each waterway's protected use. So these are the categories of designated uses and classifications of uses within those categories. Today, we're focusing on the aquatic life category of designated uses. And DEP assigns each water body a designated use based on the best available data and information that it has. And each designated use classification provides a specific level of protection and has a specific corresponding set of criteria that must be protected. As a baseline in the aquatic life category, all water bodies in Pennsylvania have at least a designated use of warm water fishes, which means that the water body must be protected so it provides a suitable habitat for survival and reproduction of warm water fish and other aquatic organisms. But streams can be assigned more protected levels of uses depending on their water quality and the habitat they support. So more protective designations include trout stocked fishes and fisheries and cold water fishes, migratory fishes. But there are higher tiers of uses which offer additional levels of protection, reserved for streams with the highest water quality. And these are special protection classifications, which consist of high quality waterways. And then there are exceptional value waterways, which have the most stringent protections. Streams have to meet certain qualifications to demonstrate its high water quality or value as an ecological habitat to obtain these special protection designations of high quality and exceptional value. And Abby and Faith will be going over that, those qualifications in more detail in the process for demonstrating those qualifications. So every water body has an existing use and a designated use. And the designated uses are the uses, the classifications that are assigned by DEP. They're a classification that the state has determined should apply to the water body. And a stream's designated use may, like I said, reflect the uses that the stream has actually attained, or they can be aspirational. A designated use might be like a goal, and the designated use can serve to protect certain uses that the stream is not actually attaining, but hopefully one day will. And these designated uses are listed in the state code under Title 25, Chapter 93. They're actually in the state law, the designated use of each stream. The existing uses, on the other hand, are the uses that the water bodies have actually achieved. These existing uses are not listed in the state code, but they are the uses that have actually been attained in the water body and can be demonstrated by meeting certain chemical or biological criteria shown in the data collected through stream monitoring over time, or by meeting certain qualifications. So there are cases when a stream may have an existing use that requires more stringent regulatory protections than its designated use provides. Like a stream may have an existing use of high quality cold water fishes, but has a lower designated use of cold water, just cold water fishes. But when a stream's existing use is higher than its designated use, or it qualifies for special protections, individuals and organizations can submit a petition arguing that the existing use needs to be recognized and that the designated use should be upgraded. And this involves collecting data and demonstrating that the stream meets those qualifications to be considered HQ or EV. By state law, if a state's existing use and designated use differ, the stream has to be protected under the standards of the most protective use. So say a factory needs a permit to discharge effluent into a waterway and it has a designated use of cold water fishes, but a petition has been submitted showing that the stream has an existing use of high quality cold water fishes. So DEP would then, after it's done its stream assessment, if it has reviewed its data and found that it does actually have an existing use of HQ of high quality, then it has to provide those more stringent regulatory protections under the HQ existing use. So there are a couple ways you can find what a nearby stream's designated use is. You can actually look in the Pennsylvania Code on the Pennsylvania Code and Bulletin website and go through Chapter 93 of Title 25. Or there are a number of different maps on DEP's website where you can just go and drive around satellite view and find your stream, click on it and find out what its designated use is. So you can use these links. We'll be making these slides available The 2020 integrated report is one such map that you can use, but there are others. So DEP maintains a list of waterways available on its website of where they've conducted stream assessments and obtained water quality data showing that the waterway's existing use classification is more protective than the designated use that's on the books. The DEP and the county conservation districts refer to this list when reviewing requests for permits and approvals so that these streams receive the highest level of the appropriate level of protection. And water bodies on this list are periodically compiled into rulemaking actions and taken before the Environmental Quality Board to upgrade the designated uses as they appear in Chapter 93 to match the existing use of the waterway. So each use has a specific level of protection. By state law, each use's criteria, the ranges of temperature and pH and the physical and chemical criteria, they need to be protected so that the stream can maintain its use. And so how is this actually done? What does this actually look like? These protections come into play during the permitting process is one such example of how these protections are actually implemented. You may be familiar with the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, NPDES permits, which are required for any point source discharge into the waters of the Commonwealth. So this is the permit that a factory would need to discharge wastewater from one of its pipes into a waterway. So theoretically, under law, a NPDES permit cannot be granted if the discharge will negatively impact water quality to the point that the stream can no longer maintain its use or attain the use's corresponding criteria. And I say theoretically because it does happen, but under law, a stream should be protected under its use. And but now it's worth mentioning that waterways with HQ and EV designations have an additional layer of protections. So what are the benefits of HQ and EV designations? Why go through the trouble of petitioning to upgrade a stream to obtain these levels of protection? In HQ and EV streams, newly proposed or additional point source effluent discharges need to undergo an anti-degradation review as part of the permitting process. So to receive a discharging permit in an HQ or EV stream, the applicant must show that the water quality of the HQ and EV stream will not be degraded. With streams which aren't HQ or EV, DEP could issue permits or approvals that negatively impact water quality. They just have to make sure that the stream's use will be protected and maintained. But with HQ and EV streams, the applicant has to demonstrate the water quality itself won't be negatively impacted. And there is an exception with HQ streams, with high quality streams. If the applicant can successfully demonstrate that a lower water quality is necessary to accommodate an important economic or social development, then a permit or approval can be issued that could negatively impact water quality. And this is called the social or economic justification, or SEJ. But with EV streams, the SEJ does not apply. There are no exceptions to the rule, and water quality cannot be degraded. So as part of this anti-degradation review for HQ and EV streams, dischargers seeking permits need to fulfill certain requirements as part of the permitting process. They have to do a non-discharge alternative analysis and evaluate whether they can eliminate the discharge through methods like reusing or recycling the wastewater, or whether there are alternative sites for the proposed project. If no environmentally sound or cost-effective non-discharge alternatives are possible, the applicants are required to use the best available combination of cost-effective treatment and implement best management practices, or BMPs, which is a fancy way of saying practices used to treat, prevent, or reduce water pollution. So the applicant could be required to have riparian buffers, which are vegetated areas between the waterway and the project where the wastewater can infiltrate into the ground, or construct vegetated swales, which collect stormwater, or construct green roofs on structures, or implement other BMPs. There are also non-degrading discharge requirements. The applicant has to demonstrate as part of the permitting process that the discharge will maintain and protect the existing quality of receiving surface waters. As I mentioned before, permittees must provide an SEJ a social or economic justification for discharges that degrade water quality in HQ streams, but there's no exception for EV streams. And it's important to note that HQ and EV streams do not block development. They're just an extra measure in place to protect the integrity of the waterway. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Faith Zerby of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. She'll be discussing how streams qualify for special protections.
Thank you, Jack, so much. That was terrific. Thank you for that good presentation. All right, so Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we've been around, since the 80s. We're an advocacy organization. We have a monitoring program, a restoration program, and we work throughout the Delaware watershed, which includes New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And we are delighted to be here with wonderful colleagues and with all of you. We see a lot of familiar faces here in the participant list, so thanks again for being here. Next slide. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'll go through it step by step. And again, there's a lot to cover, but essentially first we're going to talk about qualifying for high quality designation. How does that happen? What are the avenues that we can take as community groups to do that work? So you've got 3 different avenues that we're going to go through now. You've got the water chemistry qualifier, the looking at the critters, the biological assessment qualifier, and the Class A trout stream qualifier. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite things to do. I don't get to do it as much as I used to, but the idea of, we put the biological qualifier first, because in general, this is something that the department has used traditionally over the last, couple decades to look at stream quality, right? So you're going out, you're kicking in the stream. The slide prior kind of showed how you do it with a dip net. And you collect critters in a stream during a specific time of year. And again, the more insects you have, the more diverse the stream is. And you use DEP protocols to compare a candidate stream, the stream that you want to have upgraded, with a reference stream. And a lot of times you're out there as a biologist, I'm kicking around. I think, oh, this stream looks really great. It looks wonderful. I think it could qualify. But again, it all depends on what reference stream is connected to this analysis by the DEP. If you score with those comparisons, if you score with the reference stream and the candidate stream, and you get an 83% of insects based on 5 metrics, which we won't go into now, but it has to do with how many taxa, mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, which are the really clean water bugs. If you score an 83%, you can get high quality designation. And that's a fabulous way when you're able to do that. Next slide. The other way is through Class A designation, right? Through the Fish and Boat Commission. And again, a lot of us have been, talking with the Fish and Boat Commission for many years. There are different designations. Fish and Boat Commission goes out with their electroshockers, right? Their backpack shockers. They look at the biomass of the fish that are in these streams. And if you get a specific biomass for trout, and again, you can see here, there's wild brook trout, there's brown trout, but depending on the species of fish, you have to reach a certain biomass to be able to get Class A designation, which is really important. Now you can have a wild trout stream, and we'll talk about wilderness trout streams later, but you can have a wild trout stream that doesn't have the biomass of the Class A. You need that Class A and you need that biomass. What's really exciting about it is these streams are usually done in bundles. Fish and Boat Commission updates their lists annually for Class A, not as much for wild trout, but there was just a package or a bundle of, I believe it was over 40 streams. I can't exactly remember. We've all talked about it together. And that bundle then gets designated all together, which is kind of nice because usually, you're working with one stream at a time and it takes forever. It's kind of exciting when you finally have a bundle of the Class A streams going through the process. And there's a lot of history there, but we won't get into that at this time because we could talk about it forever. The other thing I just want to point out here that I think is really important is that even if you don't have a Class A wild trout stream, if you have a wild trout stream, any of the wetlands that are connected to it, right, hydrologically connected to that stream, are considered exceptional value wetlands. So keep that in mind because it is a little bit of a protection there. Next slide, Jack. So the water chemistry high quality qualifier, we've got Kelly on the line, I know. The Tohickon and the Tinicum Conservancy worked on this. Delaware Riverkeeper Network was a bit involved with this too, but the water chemistry qualifier is a very high bar to get. And not that we know of all the streams in Pennsylvania that have gone through this, but most groups have not really taken this on. When they have taken it on, it's really quite difficult to get that 99% results that is required by the department, right? So you're going out, you're collecting 24, grab samples. You have to look at all of these parameters, right? Including dissolved oxygen, including pH, right? pH is always changing, right? Daily pH patterns. And scientists, people like Bob Stanfield, who's no longer with us, has argued, well, pH is changing all the time. And there's, but if you don't get that criteria for pH 99% of the time, and even if you get everything else, DEP has been a very stickler, very big stickler for getting these designations or approving a high quality qualifier through this mechanism. And again, Kelly probably could have questions about that too. So next slide. Okay, now moving to exceptional value qualifiers. So again, what's important here is that for a stream to get an exceptional value designation, as it says here, you need to get one of those 3 high quality qualifiers, right? Class A, you have the insects, or you have the water chemistry, and meet one of the following below. You've got to see if it's in a national wildlife refuge or a state game propagation area, right? A location in a state park, natural area, state forest, natural area. And as you're reading these, you think, oh, there's got to be tons of these around. There aren't. Federal, state, and wild river. This is great for the Delaware River, and we'll talk about that later. There's this wonderful, I guess you could say, nebulous, outstanding national, state, regional, or local resource water. I think all of our waters are outstanding national, state, regional, local resource waters. DEP doesn't necessarily agree with us all the time on that, right? But that's one where we always try, when we do it, we're always piling things in. We pile it in because we think everything is important. Then there's a surface water of exceptional recreational significance, and that biological assessment qualifier. And again, I bolded this because it's always wonderful if you have the insects, you're at that 92%, again, not 83% for the HQ, you're at the 92%, and it's a very solid biological score, because then it's a much easier ride through the process. And I think Abby will talk a bit more about that. And then the last bullet is, of course, wilderness trout stream qualifier, and we will break this down a little bit further. Again, that's not wild. That's not a wild trout stream. It's a wilderness trout stream. It's different. And then this wonderful one at the end, which is surface water of exceptional ecological significance. And this is the one qualifier where you don't have to have that HQ designation beforehand, right? So isn't it wonderful if we could get more of those? And I will talk about this later because Bog Run is one of them, which is kind of exciting. Next slide. Okay, so this has a lot of information on it, and I'm not going to totally read it. But again, some of these qualifiers are, are land-based, right? So it's simply looking up different links. And again, as Jack talked about, we've come a long way with, interactive maps. I'm thinking 23 years ago when we were trying to figure this out, we're looking through old hard copies, or we were looking through PDFs, but now there's a lot of good interactive maps that show some of these things that are listed in regions. But you can see here that are highlighted the national wildlife refuges. We only have, 2 of those in the region. State propagation areas, again, go to the Game Commission site to look for that information. We have some links in here for the natural areas. Again, this does not include state parks, period. This is state park natural areas and state forest natural areas, which are different. But again, we always include the fact that there's state game lands or anything like that, or state park lands in petitions when we write them, because again, we always put it all in there. Then there's the federal or state wild river, right? The scenic river designation. What's exciting is, for example, the Delaware River. If we're talking about, this part of the watershed, we have beautiful stretches of the Delaware River that have lower Delaware scenic designation as well as upper. So that's very exciting. Again, the main stem though, but also places like the Tohickon and other streams, which is great. Federal wilderness areas, and then national recreation areas. Again, Delaware Water Gap, for example. That's one of the reasons why we put in a petition for that, as did other people before us. Okay, next slide. So EV qualifiers. So protecting measures adopted. This is one of these tricky components because, and again, I'm not an attorney, but essentially you have to ensure that you have both things. And you have to ensure that first, that a protective measure flows through federally state owned or managed lands, has a resource management plan, or it has multiple municipalities that have, things like stormwater ordinances, right? Steep slope ordinances, preserved land ordinances, right? Those kinds of things can be connected into that, but you can't just have that. You can't just say, oh, the stream, Bumblebee Township has these 17 ordinances that are all protective. They have floodplain ordinances that are all protected. They have MS4s. You can't just say that. They also have to have this real estate interests. This is a big one the attorneys always talk about. There has to be ownership, conservation easements, protected land in some way. And we won't get into the weeds now, again, but there's a lot of issue with what's considered the conservation easement. Is it public land or just private? And some of that's working through the process now, and we're all collectively working on it to ensure that we have what we need. But you need to have those two things combined. What we've noticed, lately is, water company land, they're starting to include, but sometimes it's very narrow. So you can interpret and look at how DEP is interpreting these, what we call softer qualifiers, to see their language, to see what they include and what they don't. The other point, just because, I figure I'll share it, is the idea of having a resource management plan. We were very excited when we heard this because DCNR, right, a sister agency, just like Fish and Boat Commission, was working, maybe 10 years ago to ensure that every one of their state parks and lands had a resource management plan, like a conservation plan. And we thought, great, this is going to be great, because if we have that, then it's one more thing to put in that petition. What we're seeing the DEP do, just based on some of their more recent decisions, is they really are saying, even if you have a management plan, you have to explicitly say that even if you're protecting the forests, for example, you're ensuring that the riparian buffer is protected and there is a water and a connectivity. So it's getting really they're getting in the weeds with this of how they interpret it. And again, it's something that we can see with the DEP reports that Abby will probably speak to, but just something to point out there about your resource management plans. Next slide. And that happens same with easements too. Okay, then this is our exceptional recreational significance. This was one I remember thinking with the Tohickon. Here's a beautiful stream. There are whitewater paddlers that get to go on the Tohickon downstream of Lake Nockamixon, and Tinicum Conservancy said, yes, this is very unique. There's nowhere in the Delaware watershed where people do whitewater, paddling, where they can do that. But no, that doesn't really count, right? It doesn't really count according to DEP. But again, this is water-based, water quality dependent recreation that is unique because there's only a limited number of naturally occurring areas and water bodies in the state that have it, right? So, the idea is we go back and forth and we argue all the time, and we always want to include it. And it hasn't quite happened as much as we would have liked in reality. But keep going, and we'll keep pressing because we do keep making progress. Next slide. So then this is again that easier, not the easier qualifier, it's not easy, but getting that 92% of macroinvertebrates and those diversity, those wonderful critters in the stream. 83% is HQ, but if you go out and you sample, then you're at 92% with the candidate stream. Fabulous. Then you don't even have to have HQ, right? You're automatically up there to the 92%. And I think Abby will talk about segmentation as well a little bit, which will be good to note, because again, you might have one part of a stream getting something for bugs, but then maybe there's another thing to mention for another segment, so that hopefully we're not getting all these segmented bits, which kind of happens in reality too. Next slide. And then the wilderness trout stream, which again, we kind of touched on this prior, but this is the idea of having this wonderful and remote experience. Very remote areas of, you know, kind of wildlands. And we don't have many. You can see this little map here kind of shows some of the pink areas as to what is wilderness trout streams. There are a few, but there aren't many. But this is another qualifier for exceptional value, not necessarily tied to Class A, as we talked about for HQ. Next slide. And then this was the one, of course, that we wish and we hope that we'll get more, have the ability to get more of, particularly if you can't have the insects and you can't get those other qualifiers, right? So, and again, I always encourage people to include this in their petition. But essentially, this is a water of exceptional ecological significance. The exciting thing I want to share about this parameter, just to put it in everybody's brain, because we talk about it on our AV team calls, is that recently DEP used the exceptional ecological significance qualifier to upgrade Bog Run, which is a tributary to the Tohickon that we talked about earlier. And it's about 4.6 miles of that stream. They used this criteria. No one pushed them to do it unless it happened in the underchannels. But talking with DEP staff, they used this criteria to essentially get, you know, almost 5 miles of stream protected in the Tohickon with this unnamed tributary. Well, it's called Bog Run, but it's unnamed tributary to Bog Run. It's not the entire Bog Run. So it's really interesting. And what they did here is they had the notes somewhere, but essentially they found and they used the Nature Conservancy information that talked about an endemic species to this tributary. And this is part of the Quakertown Swamp Complex, if anyone knows that beautiful location. But the point is that stream, I believe, was a trout stocked fishery, and, you know, which means that it was warmer. But they were saying, hey, but this is really unique. And there's this bottomland, hardland forest that's there. And there are species that are very water dependent. And therefore, we are going to upgrade it using this qualifier, which I was ecstatic about. So they are starting to do this. And I think we should be pushing them a bit more as, you know, us as the community groups. So it's a really exciting one. And again, this one is the one that you don't need to have the other high quality criteria. You could have it be just EV from, say, warm water fishery to an exceptional ecological significance. But again, hasn't happened often, but never say never. And maybe this is, you know, a start to something bigger and better. Okay. Now we've got Abby Jones with us, and she will share with you wonderful things. Take it away, Abby.
Yeah, thanks, Faith. So I'm going to be talking about the super exciting submission, review, and regulatory adoption process. Next slide. So Penn Future, we're a statewide environmental advocacy organization, but we have been doing a lot of work over the decades in the Delaware River Watershed. We have spearheaded and we managed the Our Pocono Waters campaign, which I think many of you have heard about. We engage in public comments, legal actions, and educate community members. So we are partners with everybody on this call and many people that are participating as well. So we think it's a great thing, and we thank Jack for setting this up. Next slide. So the first step in the stream redesignation process is to determine your stream's designated uses in the PA regulations. That way you know your baseline, and you can also plan out your goals with the redesignation petition. And as Jack talked about, designated uses are part of PA's written regulations. So you can find the information by searching through 25 PA Code section 93.9. Jack had the hyperlink, and it's here too. And then you find your drainage list, and then you find your stream segment or stream section, and you figure out your designated use. So that's your step one. Next slide, please. And then you need to know your waters. So you should also have a sense of where you're going to go with your petition to redesignate, if you're going to do the entire stream or just a stream segment. And this may also change after you've done your initial data collection. Finally, you will come in, and this will come into play later as we talk, but you determine if there's any past or recent petitions to upgrade your waters, whether based at the stream level, sub-watershed level, or regional level. For example, Delaware Riverkeeper Network has its Upper Delaware River Regional Petition that encompasses a lot of the streams in the Upper Delaware region. And then finally, check out DEP stream redesignation and existing use list. These are available through their stream redesignation website. You can just Google it, and it has a lot of information, and Jack had touched on the existing use list already as a good resource. Next slide. So the next step in the redesignation process is collecting available data. And this you're basically shoring up the evidence to support the petition to DEP. And a lot of times what we're talking about when we're talking about redesignation petitions for aquatic life is we're talking about that biological qualifier that Faith mentioned. Now, some groups have the expertise in-house or through their volunteers to undertake technical fish sampling, studies, mapping, etc. And many others choose to hire a consultant to do some or all of the work for them. We'll talk about support later, but consider joining forces with other local watershed organizations, conservation organizations, or even regional ones if funding or expertise is an issue for your organization. And now Faith has done an excellent job of outlining all the different qualifiers that may apply, including those softer qualifiers. And what we really recommend, and I think Faith hit on this great, is that we want to include everything in your petitions. For example, if multiple qualifiers apply, if you have the biological qualifier, but you also might have soft qualifiers, go ahead and include them on the petition. That way you give DP multiple options and avenues to support a redesignation for your stream. So next slide, please. So now that you know your waters and you've done the necessary studies, mapping, and etc., you are now ready to complete and submit your petition. And I'm just going to quickly take a few minutes to go through the steps in the petition to redesignate a stream in PA, that process. So the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB, just happens to have a handy dandy form that you should use for the stream redesignation petition process. And it's available through their website. Again, a Google search will be able to get you there, but I did include the link here. And before I move on, I want to just take a minute to describe how environmental regulations are promulgated in Pennsylvania, because it is slightly different than in other states. Usually an agency will adopt its own regulations, but in Pennsylvania, we have the Environmental Quality Board, which is a 20-member independent board that adopts all of the environmental regulations of the DEP and other environmental agencies in Pennsylvania. So that's why we're talking about both DEP and you'll hear us talk about EQB as we move through this process. Now, there are three main stages in the redesignation petition process. Stage 1, submission, review, and acceptance of your petition. Stage 3, DEP stream assessment and evaluation. And stage 3, the regulatory process. And I'm going to walk quickly through each one of those stages. So stage 1. Once you've done the legwork and determined your stream's designated and existing uses and determine whether your stream qualifies for an upgrade, then you need to start the petition process to the EQB. And I want to point out that this is where it gets a little tricky, as I mentioned, between EQB and DEP and who's responsible for what, since the DEP works so closely with the EQB when promulgating or amending the regulations, especially when we're talking about stream redesignations. So first, the petition, and use the EQB's form again, together with supporting information is submitted to DEP. DEP reviews the petition for completeness and notifies the petitioner, and that takes about 30 days. And then the petition is presented to EQB from the DEP. At that point, the EQB will publish notice of acceptance of the petition in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. And I just want to point out at this stage that if for some reason the petition is rejected, and I've listed the rationale here, the process ends unless there is new information or changes in stream conditions to support resubmission at a later date. So you want to make sure that when you are working through this petition process and you're going in and you're collecting the data and you're putting in the time and effort, you want to make sure that you've done your due diligence and you've checked to make sure that none of these reasons might apply, because you don't want to have to basically start all over again in a few years. Next slide, please. So we'll move on to stage 2, stream assessment and evaluation. So DEP will undertake an independent evaluation of all the streams that are up for redesignation. So they'll use your petition, they'll use your data as kind of like a baseline going into it, but they will actually go out and independently assess the streams. So DEP publishes the notice of intent to assess the stream and publicly solicits submission of any data or information relevant to the assessment. So this is an opportunity, if you're the petitioner, to encourage people, or yourself if you have new data since you've submitted the petition, because sometimes this can take a little time, go ahead and utilize that to get more information before DEP. DEP biologists conduct stream assessments, and I want to point out, this is where the stream redesignation process can get hung up, unfortunately, time-wise. It may take years for DEP to actually go out and complete the assessment process. And unfortunately, there is no regulatory timeline to complete the assessment. So this is something that all of the groups on this call have been kind of reaching out to DEP to kind of get this timeline, to get this backlog moving a little bit more quickly. Now, once the assessment is completed, DEP evaluates the data and prepares a draft evaluation report. This triggers a 30-day public comment period on that draft report. And this is a good opportunity for you to get public comment in. We do a lot of action alerts in support of petitions, and we can talk about that later. DEP then considers the comments and prepares a revised report, if necessary. And the stream redesignation recommendation report provides the basis for DEP to recommend EQB accept or deny the redesignation request. Again, we're talking about changing the on-the-book code regulations, so it is quite a process. Again, if DEP recommends denial of the redesignation, no revised report is necessary. And if EQB accepts the denial recommendation, again, the petition process ends there. There's no appeal process here, and that's very unfortunate. Now, the positive side at this point is that this stage may result in the listing of a stream or stream segment on DEP's existing use list. And remember, as Jack mentioned, as between the existing use and a designated use for any stream or stream segment, the more protective use must be applied by DEP and permits. So even as we move through the lengthy regulatory process to get the designated use changed, once DEP has made their recommendation to upgrade, your stream should be getting the protections necessary under the existing use. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So now we get into the final stage, the regulatory process. And I must say that this slide is a gross oversimplification of the process. But since we could spend a whole hour just talking about this stage, we're going to have to kind of move quickly here and leave it with this. So assuming all goes well, EQB adopts the proposed amended regulation to change the designated use of your stream. And after public comment, DEP then drafts a final regulation and submits it to EQB for adoption. Now it's on to Pennsylvania's Independent Regulatory Review Commission, also known as IRC, to consider the final regulation. And who is IRC, you may ask? So the Independent Regulatory Review Commission was created by the Pennsylvania General Assembly about 30 years ago to review the Commonwealth agency's regulations. And they make sure that they are in the, quote, public interest, and that the agency has the statutory authority to enact the regulation and that it's consistent with legislative intent. So it's a final checkpoint to ensure that the agency that's making the regulation has the authority to do so and that it is actually furthering the intent of the public interest. Again, this is a place where stream redesignation petitions can get held up a little bit, but we're not going to go into that in any detail now. So IRC will then hold the final public comment period on the final regulation and gives an opportunity to the Senate and the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committees These are referred to as the standing committees for public comment, and the PA Attorney General also reviews it. Now, assuming all goes well with the IRC process and the final regulation is cleared, it'll be published as a final regulation and your stream is now redesignated. So your upgraded designated use is now officially on the books. It is codified as a regulation in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. So I know I just bombarded you with a ton of information about a very technical and lengthy process. So if you need help, please check out Penn Future's revised stream redesignation handbook for a step-by-step guide on the PA stream redesignation process. You can download it for free from our website, or if you reach out to myself or Emily Baldoff at Penn Future, we can send you a hard copy in the mail. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about a few considerations before pursuing redesignation, because this can be a quite resource-intensive process. There might be a few things you want to think about before you really dive in. But that said, never be afraid to get the petition rolling. It's a very important process, and the more upgrades we get, the higher protections we have our streams, the better it is. So first, make sure that the data supports the proposed upgrade. If you do the studies and you're not quite meeting those numbers, think about, can you support a lower upgrade? So maybe you're looking at a high quality designation instead of an exceptional value designation, and that's fine. If you're still getting more protections, and you could maybe eventually use that as a stepping stone towards the exceptional value designation. It's still an upgrade, right? Also, and I think Faith mentioned this before too, like think about whether or not maybe a large segment of your stream, or if not the entire basin, maybe a stream or two, or some of the tribs might be meeting these qualifiers. If so, consider doing a petition limited to those segments. Again, looking forward to the future, maybe the other parts of the basin can be upgraded at a later date. So if the commitment seems too great for your organization, as I mentioned before, can you partner with others to share the work? The next thing is, remember to check that your stream hasn't been petitioned and rejected in the last 2 years. I mentioned this before. And make sure that's not already on the existing use list. The existing use list kind of acts as a notification that maybe a stream is going through the redesignation process. DEP also has an ongoing stream redesignation list on their website. Make sure you check that out. If there is potential development that could be threatening the water quality of your stream, consider maybe moving quickly to hopefully get the stream on the existing use list before the development begins, even as it, again, works its way through the regulatory process. But also be aware that strong opposition can sometimes make the process more difficult or lengthy. So there are pros and cons when you're thinking through that. And then finally, is this upgrade something that your local community will support? If not, think about ways to garner support for your upgrade. And we can talk about this in the next slide. So support for redesignation petitions is important for many reasons. It can make the process run more smoothly. It can garner grassroots support when it comes to public comment periods. And municipal and elected support is incredibly important, as well as local industry and business, which can carry a lot of weight. Consider outreach to local governments, business entities, and community members before or even right after you submit your petition. It's a great way to inform the community and also answer questions and dispel some of the harmful myths that we hear about stream upgrades. And namely, it's going to prevent development and economic development in the area. That's just simply not true. So if you can get out into the public and talk to them and get them on your side before you submit the petition, the better. Finally, there are any number of entities that can support you in this process, including our Pocono Waters and the Pennsylvania Campaign for Clean Water's EV work group that Faith leads, both of which all of the groups on this call, on this webinar, are members of, so you can reach out to any one of us if you have interest in those. Next slide, please. So finally, why does redesignation matter? And I think Jack has touched on this, Faith has touched on this, and Jim will talk about it too, but each protected water use has its own set of water quality criteria standards that are designated to protect the use. So the higher the use of the stream, the more protections afforded to the water. and HQ and EV are the most protective uses in PA, and water should be afforded the highest and most appropriate use. So if the designated use doesn't do it, look at existing uses. Work to upgrade streams so that the designated use matches the existing use. Then you're talking about watchdogging permits. So permits should be protected to the highest use of the stream. If not, and this is something I know Penn Future, DRN, Clean Air Council, we all work on this, submit comments and data and consider challenging permits if nothing changes. And that's something that we all can help you with. There are also financial, direct, ecological, and indirect benefits of waters with higher designated uses, especially when we're talking about the special protection HQ and EV waters. And finally, I don't think we can hit on this hard enough, but EV and HQ waters will not preclude development, either residential, industrial, economic development. It'll just require smart, protective approaches to that development. So this is why stream redesignations matter. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Voight, president of Apwc, to talk about their EV petition. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. You guys really covered the nuts and bolts of getting the whole thing going. A little bit about our organization. We were formed in 2001. We are a 501c nonprofit, all volunteer organization, pretty much all amateurs, no professionals among the group to speak of. Both our watersheds cover about 190 square miles, and the headwaters of both streams, the Pohopoco and the Apwc, are in Monroe County, flow basically southwest to the Lehigh River, and eventually reach the Delaware River in Easton. So it's quite a journey from the headwaters down to where they pour into the Delaware. A couple of interesting facts. Pohopoco Creek was dammed to form Beltsville Lake, which is a huge recreation area. And Wild Creek, who's a tributary to the Pohopoco as well, was dammed to form Wild Creek Reservoir, which is the drinking water supply for the city of Bethlehem. A lot of people don't know that, but it's a pretty significant factor. Okay, next slide. Okay, the segment that we're requesting for redesignation is on the right side there, there's the purple line, and to the upper right is the headwaters of Apwc Creek, which is actually called Ross Common Creek. That is on Pennsylvania American Water property, and recently was purchased by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, 2,500 acres. So the headwaters of Apwc is now part of National Wildlife Refuge. We're taking our redesignation segment from the point source up in Ross Common down to the confluence with Buckwaw Creek, down in Lower Towamensing Township. It's right near the Blue Mountain Ski Area. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. But that's the segment that we're asking for. Next slide. We started the petition process in 2008 because of a threat, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we had help from the Monroe County Conservation District. They and DEP both worked on the biological assessment. We did score a 92 on several different points on the stream. The scoring was just indicated that these waters possessed a high quality aquatic community and was a basis for designation as special protection waters. We had about 6 qualifiers total. That was one of the big ones. Location of National Wildlife Refuge, about 10 square miles is in the watershed. Actually, that can be added to now with the acquisition of the Pennsylvania American Water property. Surface water of exceptional ecological significance. We have had bog turtles documented in this watershed. In fact, on our own property in 1995, our property is bisected by Apwc Creek, and we had bog turtles on our own property. So we know they're here. Fish and Wildlife has documented them. And because of the presence of bog turtles, that made by law the wetlands, because they were hydrologically connected, into EV wetlands. That was about an 8-month battle with DEP. I was writing to them back and forth saying, like, here's the documentation, we have bog turtles. And finally they wrote back that, okay, they are EV wetlands. I still have the original letter from that. We do have a 2.2 mile segment of a Class A wild trout stream, and state game lands 168 is on both sides of the Apwc Creek in Eldred Township and Ross Township. Next slide. Now, our big challenge. In 2001, there was a proposal made by a group of investors that wanted to build a private racetrack on the side of Kittatinny Ridge, a 350 some acre property. Apwc Creek was one boundary. The Appalachian Trail was the upper boundary. It's supposed to be a private racetrack, members only. Membership started at 33,000, I think. No public access. I don't know if anybody knows the roads here, but we have a lot of one-lane bridges and twisty-turny roads. And they picked Eldred Township because at the time the township had no zoning. So a group of local citizens promptly formed a resistance group, Blue Mountain Preservation Association, and started looking for legal challenges to the proposed racetrack. And as an effort, the Apwc Poco Watershed Conservancy joined in on this to fight this racetrack. Let's see then. This was in 2001. We started our petition in 2008. We submitted to EQB in December of 2010, and we were accepted for further study. And after years of battle, the Alpine Rose Racetrack was defeated in 2013. It was a long time of a small group of people really fighting our hearts out to save our land. It's just a little ways downstream from where I live, so it was a battle that was close to home. But in the long run, we kind of exhausted them with legal battles. Their engineering plans were flawed. We kept taking them to court, and we would go to court in Harrisburg. There'd be one whole side of suits and investors, and on our side of the aisle were maybe 8 people in street clothes with nobody with a college degree. So you can fight these things, but in the long run, the effort paid off, because in 2013, it became state game, more property on state game lands 168, and it's now open to the public. So it wasn't all an uphill battle. After that, we started getting public access, and a local naturalist discovered the brook snake-tailed dragonfly, which was never recorded in Pennsylvania. An additional 300 acres was purchased by U.S. Fish and Wildlife right on the creek, both sides. And Eldred Township Board of Supervisors, who originally opposed our redesignation, finally got a change of members, and they wrote a letter of support for us in 2016. So the good things like that, we always had to pass them on to DEP and make sure they were aware of what was going on. And that was a really important thing. Okay, next slide. This comes under the lessons, and I think Abby, you already talked about this, is start gathering local support as soon as possible. I think the fact that the racetrack was proposed probably spurred that on a little bit for us. And something else that was extremely important was working with the local conservation district. The Monroe County Conservation District was a huge help in putting this petition together, both with information and helping us through the process. And we did use the Penn Future redesignation handbook pretty much word for word. That was a great, great help for us as well. And another important thing is to attend your township meetings, because that is where the real information gets decimated about what's going on in your area. I mean, you can read the newspaper if you want or watch TV news, but nothing substitutes going to a township meeting and hearing about what the planning commission comes up with. Like, hey, there's going to be a subdivision of 20 houses here, and you wouldn't know about it till the dozers are in and starting to clear land. So attending those local meetings, they might be boring sometimes, but it's extremely important. Knowing your contacts at DEP and building a relationship with them. Like, as I said in the previous slide, keeping them updated to everything positive that was happening that would aid our petition, more information to, as you would say, pile on to make our case stronger. Keeping accurate records and files. I have a file upstairs that's pretty thick of all the things that we've been through right from the get-go. And local knowledge is extremely important as well. Know your stream, like Abby said, know what could be redesignated, like what is good water quality and what's a good candidate to put on the petition. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. And we've been on this for 12 years now since we started, and we're still waiting to hear of any forward motion. We're hoping to hear something soon. Next slide. Okay, Jack, do you want to take that?
Yeah.
Or-
As part of from experience with stream redesignation petitions, as Abby and Jim brought up, local support matters very much in this process. Having a show of community support or support from local elected officials does make a difference in the ultimate decision of how things move along during the petition, during the regulatory process. And so if you work or live in the region of Apwc Creek, you can sign on to a petition urging the Department of Environmental Protection to produce a draft report recommending to upgrade Apwc Creek to EV status. And we have the petition on a Google form, and you can use this bit.ly link to access the petition and sign on. We'll also be sharing this link in an email in the following the webinar. So you can go on, and if you live in the Apwc area, we're especially encouraging you to go on and sign a letter of support. That's just urging DEP to produce a favorable recommendation of an EV upgrade for Apwc. So we'll be sending that out to you soon. Great. Well, thank you to all the presenters. That was a lot of great information, but so clearly communicated. We covered a lot of ground here. And I don't know if we have time to go over this now, but you can check out our slide deck, which will be available online, and learn how each of our organizations can support stream redesignation efforts. So whether you are interested in starting a petition, or whether you have a petition that's in a stage of the submission process or the regulatory process, our organizations can support your efforts. So you can look at this slide online and learn more about how each of our organizations can provide advocacy, outreach, education, technical assistance, legal assistance, all sorts of different ways of supporting your efforts. And here are some upcoming events and helpful resources. There's going to be our Pocono Waters virtual stream redesignation handbook workshop that Penn Future is going to be hosting in January. We always recommend people to sign up for Clean Air Council's action alerts on our website. We have an action alert out right now urging Governor Wolf to oppose the Penn East pipeline, which actually travels through the region near Apwc. And then DEP has draft reports of the Lehigh Valley, Carbon County streams, and Beaver Creek in Delaware County out for comment now. And that comment period is active through December 14th. So you can go on to the DEP's website and comment in support of those upgrades. Great. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll be taking questions and answers. You can write your questions in the Q&A box, and we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you for sticking with us. I have a comment that says great info. Thank you. And no questions yet. Man, I guess we just really covered it all tonight. All right. Well, a great refresher. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, very good. So Yep, stay tuned for an email, which will have a recording and the slide deck, as well as a link to the petition where you can sign on to support the exceptional value upgrade for Aquashikala Creek. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and we wish you all a good evening, and take care.
Thanks for your help.
Thanks.
Night, everybody.
Everybody. Goodbye.